I bet you they did. Just
She came
saying.
here to make sure the assistant treasurer says it right. For those of you who don't know, that's my wife.
You're getting the thumbs up, Ron.
Thumbs up. Okay, we are going live. Welcome to everybody on streaming with us and to our august audience of 3 people. We'll call this meeting to order. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Sorry.
Mary Ann made the motion and Jackson seconded it.
No, I didn't say
No,
that.
actually,
David, all right.
I'm innocent.
All in favor? Aye. And while we were doing this, the audience grew by 33%. So Jerry, we're going all out. What's that now? If you're in the audience and you don't have a copy of the sheet, the 9-pager up there, you're going to want your own copy of the 9-pager. So Jerry, grab your wife one. Okay, so what we're going to start with first today is a budget discussion. We had, and I never thought you'd be able to read that, so I figured you'd need paper, which is why we've given you paper. What I would like to do is have me go through the 9 pages first, and then after I've went through the 9 pages, we will take board comments and we will take public comments gladly, as we normally do. We had our draft as of August 20th. In that August 20th draft, we had a deficit of $250,000. We had an updated version as of September 27th. What I have done in this package here is really do a comparison August 20th versus September 27th. On that day, we spent about 6-7 hours. So I think really we beat a lot of things to death. Today we focus on what's different. And then where I went with this package is I really wanted, we have new information being Island Village, which I will talk about during, when I go through stuff originally, which impacts our budget. Lifeguards, which we'll talk about, plus I think we need to start, depending on what we decide today, we need to start communicating lifeguard type stuff to the community that we're talking about. And we had other budget saving type things and stuff like that. So we have now got a balanced draft subject to board review. And from a timeline perspective, Steve will have to help me here, but we really need to be to the point where at the end of today, I think we are nodding our head yes, or else we've got very explicit directions on what we want to research further so we can get there. We have a next meeting in about a week and a half.
the 21st is the next workshop.
21st is the next workshop. So I think, go ahead.
Sure. We have best practices in this community have been a month out. So if we're looking at a November 4th voting for this budget, we need to get a letter out to the residents by tomorrow, most likely. Unless there's drastic changes, then we may have to push back a little bit the approval of the budget. Now, it's not required by law.
I think
but
getting a
it's-
package out tomorrow is too quick. I'll just be honest with you, because
I would be inclined to agree.
we need time to review it. But when's our meetings? We got a board meeting in the middle of November, right? Because of Thanksgiving, we moved it up a little.
Correct.
The 18th, I think, is the
18th?
date.
Right.
So I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, board, but I'm thinking we approve this on November the 18th. Does that work?
That will work.
That makes sense to me.
I vaguely recall a couple of years ago when, before I was on the board, there was a very delayed budget, and it caused a problem with assessments
Yeah, it
and
did a
sending
lot.
out. Are we going to be able to avoid that problem?
It's pushing it. I think it'll be right at the deadline for where we need to get the approval, and we have some sheets that we have to fill out and turn them into corporate then so they can get everything loaded.
Okay.
So it would be pushing it at that point.
Today's?
And I know we talked about the 23rd originally approving it, but because there's a town hall, we wanted some town hall feedback also. I mean, the 30 days is not required by statute. It's just something that we've done in this community. So if it's 20 days, I think that's still doable, but I'll leave that to the board's discretion on what you think's best.
Okay, so basically, we come out of today, hopefully we're very close to agreement. We work on getting a package ready to go out to the community. Because of stuff going on and everything else, I think we've got to, everybody on the board review the cover letter, the package and stuff like, because we're talking about a lot of things here. So today, we have an agenda with 6 things on it, but getting through the budget is the important thing, and if other things get pushed, so be it.
Is there a way that we can at least notify the public, even if it's not finalized, that the budget is in process? Please look, because our timeline is just going to be shorter. I feel like I feel like not giving them the 30 days is a disservice, or at least as much as possible. So perhaps, giving them a link, here's the discussions for the budget, that way at least the information's available to them.
Well, what we could do is the CROA board workshop on the 4th, we could just push it out a week or something like that.
CROA workshop on, November 4th.
November
Okay.
4th. So I don't think, today, glasses so bad. Today is November 7th. I don't think there's any chance we get the letter out before the end of this week.
I would
which be
agree.
the 10th or the 11th.
I would agree.
So if you want to give people a month, then what we could do is we could move the November 4th workshop till November 8th, or the 11th is Veterans
11th is
Day. We don't
Monday.
want that, but, well, we could do the 11th. I don't know if that works for people.
It just depends on work schedules.
Or we could do November 12th, Tuesday. David says no. Everybody says no.
I can't do Tuesdays, sorry.
What was wrong with the 4th?
It doesn't give us 30 days.
It doesn't give you
Are we
30 days.
required to give 30 days?
We're not.
Do you think 21 days is adequate?
Well,
to keep on
that's what I'm
schedule?
saying, if we're going to do, my point is, if we put the links out there so people can actually get access to it, I'm okay with doing the vote then. I just want to make sure that we're not waiting till the last minute through Flash
Okay, so.
through Flash or through
We-
something
we-
like
But we
that.
have had an exhaustive meeting, and I know people watched it because people have talked to me. We're
Mm-hmm.
having another meeting today. I'm personally happy with the 4th.
I'm fine with the 4th, just make sure we have the links so that people can say, we are in active budget talks, our vote is on the 4th. Please speak up, please reach out before then.
And we posted the work packets
Right.
that you all have been reviewing in these meetings. I know that
Well, then
they've
that's
been
fair
modified
enough.
and
I think,
changed throughout.
yeah, we just need to
That's
make
fair
sure that we
enough.
have, hey, we're voting for the budget on November, whatever it is, notify them that that's what we're voting.
We have learned that flash emails work. What we
Mm-hmm.
could do is shoot to get out a flash email on Thursday saying we're going to vote on the 4th, and here's the budget package, and it'll also be mailed to your house. We could do something like that. Is that fair?
Okay.
So
I'm
we'll
good with that.
target Thursday, get out a flash email, but then it'll also then be in the Friday flash and everything else. We're voting on the 4th.
Might we have a few highlights in that flash about what is significantly different?
On this Thursday flash, I'm intending on it being the same package, but I'm seeing it's going to be a 1.5 page cover letter about the evolution of the fields, what has happened and stuff like that, plus the normal thing that Steve does. But then,
Right.
we're pretty much saying, we get through today, this is Steve's job to get this done over the next 2 or 3 days, the board's going to review it,
And
it
that,
goes.
that normal thing takes each of the budget line items,
That's-
but it's still a
it's gonna-
draft. It's still in draft form
It's in draft form till it's
until
voted
we
on.
vote on it.
Until we vote on it.
And
But
then
it's-
we mail
but
it
it's-
out.
It's going to be in final package, because it's going to be, here's the package, in a final package format, and it's being mailed to you too, and we're voting on the 4th.
Rachel is looking puzzled, you might
Go
want to
ahead.
clarify exactly what you want.
Just call it the final proposed budget, final draft proposed budget.
We're going to send an email flash on Thursday then.
Right, and then if we can get the letter out next week, early next week,
Well,
that,
once we've got, if the letter's going in the email flash, then it can be
Okay.
mailed Friday, Monday, I don't care. Get it out as soon as
okay.
you can get it
So,
mass produced.
not only me putting it together, but enough opportunity for the board to review what we put together and then get it out Thursday.
Yes.
The printer requires about 4 business days notice, and we're to schedule things, and it takes us about a
We're
day.
doing it.
Okay, so that's the reason we're going to do the Thursday email flash, because people will have it like that, and then it's however much time you get the printer and you get it out, we do it.
And then have it available on posting, people can link it.
Okay. Fair enough on timeline? Let's go to the 9-pager. Okay, so we had, if you start right there at the top, association dues have went up $32,489. In the August 20th budget, because David asked me this question the other day, we had a 2% increase. This is an additional $32,000, which balances it, which puts us at about a 2.8% increase. So as where we thought originally we might be talking 7, we're now talking 2.8%. Okay? The next item is Island Village. So let's talk about Island Village, because it's going to be in here quite a bit. The new piece of information since we met and discussed August 20th is David Holm, who was at our last board meeting, everything, has met with me, met with Steve and everything. Island Village Phase 1 is locked, loaded, and ready to roll. You may or may not have seen it, but Mattamy paid $16 million on September 30th to buy all the land for Phase 2, and Phase 2 is now, it's spent for $16 million, so they're going to
Closed
proceed
on
with it.
September 30th, yeah.
So, Island Village is happening. So I got 132,587 here. I'll show you in a couple of pages what supports that, but that was obviously a big item. Recreation fee apartments. Steve, we had an increase from 298 to 312. What was that driven by?
It's all of the recreation expenses. So as the recreation expenses go up, the formula allocation of the different units, and that's where we get that number from.
So you
But
did
mostly-
rebalancing.
Yeah, rebalancing, but mostly because of the increased complex expenses that
Okay.
all go in that category.
Okay, and then the increase in the working capital contribution from 290 to 292 really reflects the fact that we went up to 0.7% up above, so you get a little bit more fee that way. Athletic field income dropped from 83.5 to 76.8, reflecting Steve's best estimates based on stuff, so that number is down a little from even what we thought we had before.
And again, we certainly will do everything we can to promote additional revenues for that complex, but I think we want to be conservative as we're looking at offsetting assessments with that.
Right. So when you look at total revenues, gross revenues are at 6.4 million, net of contra is at the $4.9 million. So strong revenues. If you go to expenses down there at the bottom, you'll see CJC is down 13,000, and I'll talk about that on that page in a couple of minutes. If you go to page 2 of 9, we added a little bit of legal, $5,000, really for the spillover of the charter review stuff spilling over into next year, because it's charter review. There's a meeting tonight, but it's moving along fine. November 18th has been set as the hard date for them to give us stuff, but there will be constant legal reviews and stuff going right up until ballots are sent out in, I forget if it's late January or early February, but in that time period when it goes out. Okay, pools, lifeguard staff. Let's discuss this in more detail after I've gone through the 10 pages, but we've eliminated lifeguards entirely. We've had research from Tom Slayton. We've talked to our insurance agent. I actually think, based upon everything I've read, that what we're doing today is the worst possible scenario for the town, because we're saying, when you have, and I'm just going to do 1 minute and then we'll get to it later. When you have a lifeguard, you're taking on the highest degree of liability, because the lifeguard is responsible for everything safety-wise and everything with the pool, and you are implying that the association, homeowners association, is taking on maximum liability and having maximum oversight. If you don't have the lifeguards and you have pool monitors, we've expanded the camera system and stuff like that, and you have very good signage, then it becomes more of a swim at your risk type perspective. Stay alert and stay aware. So that's what we have done here. This is $58,000. If we say we want to keep the lifeguards, then I don't think this number is $58,000. I think this number is higher, because I think it's the worst thing is, I think we can all possibly say, is that the only people who matter are the people who swim at Lakeside, and if everybody else has something happen, it doesn't matter. So we're either in the lifeguard business at all our pools, or we're not in the lifeguard business. And that's the decision I think we as a board need to make, and we'll come back to that when we open this up for conversation. But that's a big ticket item along with Island Village when you really look at things driving this. Technology committee budget went off of here but went to CJC, so we'll talk about that. $1,000 of gas money on here is the issue that I think we will workshop at a little of an upcoming workshop, but this is the one where we had people using their own cars, and we said, we're not going to do that. If they're going to use their own cars, they haven't even been getting reimbursed for mileage, and they're taking the risk, and we're saying that's wrong. So, on the bottom page two there, you can see the $254,000 deficit is now zero. So we have a budget that balances with an increase to residents of 2.7%. If you go to page 3, this is CJC. And just to remind everybody, CJC sits on top over CROA and CANOA. CANOA takes 25% of CJC expenses, and we take 75%. So when you look at CJC there, and I'm in the top left of the numbers there, you can see the allocation from CROA is $1,214,000, from CANOA, which is non-owned entities, 404,000. Okay, down under the expenses, we have $46,000 because through the elimination of IT support positions that were going to be new positions that we said, all right, we're just not going to do that. And we can, David raised some questions, and we can talk about that some more in a little bit. Insurance premiums went up 22,000, and I really wasn't sure why. What drove that?
Well, well, I don't know, I'm not positive, but,
Did we
Lou
get a new
Byron.
quote or something?
well, Lou Byron told us everything would raise 8%. We had not, in the original bid, included the environmental protection, liability,
So we
insurance,
updated-
those
we
additional
updated things that we,
things.
okay,
Right.
so this is consistent with our prior conversation, but there was things that I guess had not been updated. Okay, so that's what that is. And we agreed at the last meeting that Mary Ann would be the insurance guru and would do a thorough review with Susan and Lou and that. Town Hall Network, $20,000 increase. We had $30,000 of savings on CROA. We had, in the last meeting, it said we would drop that budget from 30 to 20, so here's where the 20 is coming in. So we had just moved it to CJC because it benefits CROA and CANOA being part of technology here, which everybody uses. Supplies and equipment dropped 9,000. I think that was getting rid of the copier at the athletic facilities and going with a cheaper, easier solution.
And we took a tighter look at those numbers, and
Okay.
we can keep that flat where we have been this year.
Perfect. And then we got the park and pool numbers. The original 9996 had fluff in it, and in our last conversation, we said a real number was $5,000, so that's that drop. So you have savings here overall of 17,000. So those are the big picture items that drive our change. Fair enough? Okay, so let's go to page 4 of 9. This will force all of you to scrunch your eyes, unfortunately. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to take a good hard look at Island Village. So I built a 2020 to 2026 budget, because Gary's committee thinks we ought to do 2 years, and I said, well, that's just not enough time, then we'll do 6. And the reality of the matter is, it's not that hard to look into the future. Island Village drives everything. There have been conversations ongoing around Stetson, if we would ever want to buy it, or if we want to build a community center. So I've wrapped up all that in here, so we can have an interesting conversation. So Island Village, if you look across the top, I've got calendar years 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. And just interrupt me if I really get going too fast here. They are going to start, and if you go down to the left, under calendar year 2020, they are going to start pulling plat assessments in 2020. Steve and I actually threw in a little extra time versus when they actually told us they were going to pull them for delay. But the reality of the matter is the bridge is done. They are in a situation where they need to start getting ready to build homes, and the school is pressuring them because the school desperately needs the space, and the school needs to get there. So as soon as they pull a plat, they become homeowners in essence. So that fee, if you look under 2020 up above, the assessment rate of the $975.80, if everybody sees it, that is what we're saying would be the rate. And our rate this year in 2019 was $949. So when I talk about the increase of 2.7%, that is at $275.80. If they pull, and you can see the number of units there, I've got 51, 101, 109, sorry, and 119. So they're going to start pulling the plats with the county, and when they do that, then they owe us association fees. For calendar year across, what I did was I said, okay, if they pull the 51 on February 15th, and for example, they told us they were going to do that in early January, so we threw on some fluff. Then those 51 units become due on February 15th, and we took a full year times 10.5 over 12, so that's the revenue for right there. So if you look at those 3 items and you go down to the bottom of that column, you'll see the 132,587, which is the number that was there before. So I built all this because I'm a neurotic accountant, and I couldn't keep track of it otherwise. So then if you go to 2021, okay, we've got all the assessments on phase 1, which is 279. And you can see that same 279 if you went to the bottom right down here. See the columns, 3 columns to the right? To the far right, you see where it's got home phases, number of units, and it's got plats, and it's got sales? And then it goes down to the bottom, so you can see, we got 279, you can see when the plats are there, you can see when you assume the sales. For phase 2, you can see when the plats are pulled and you assume sales. And for number 3, you can do the same down at the bottom. So right now, we are assuming 979 units in Island Village. Now, for perspective, phase 1 was supposed to be 300 homes and 300 apartments. The 300 homes became 279 when you start drawing all your boundaries and all that other stuff, and you get into the realities of what you can do. Everything on this piece of paper is informative, but it'll end up being wrong because it'll continue to move and evolve as to dates and numbers and stuff like that. But the purpose here is to help you really see a picture of what's going to happen. So if you go down 2021, 22, 23, going across, you will see where the plats get pulled in all the phases, and you'll see where the homes get sold. Now, across the top up there, you'll see where the 975 goes to 995.31, goes to 101.5.22. I'm inflation adjusting every year by 2% because it's as good as any assumption we can make right now for future inflation.
And there'll be some fluctuations in an apartment fee too, based on what type of amenities they build there and what type
Right.
of expenses come along with those amenities.
And you can see on apartment fees, I've got the 311 going to 317, going to 324, so I've inflation adjusted there. So what's it? And then, so what's important here is the association dues annually become a revenue item to us because it's collected every month. The sale, I've assumed the sale of every unit only once. I haven't done any resale estimates or stuff like that. That goes to working capital. So, you know, when you look at it in 2020, there's no sales, which is why I got the 132 at the bottom left. But then in every other year, I got association dues and I got working capital and I keep growing it. Because what I want to use this for is education of us, education of the community, because if something happened, if Stetson became available, or if somebody says I have to have a community building, or pick your poison, we need to be able to intelligently say, what does our future look like? So this was built, and anybody in the audience and anybody on the board can shoot harpoons at it, and we can continue to refine it as time goes on and stuff like that, but it becomes a good measuring stick for us to say, what is the expectation for the next 6, 7 years? That was the purpose of this. Does this sheet make sense before I move on?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I think I understand this. You are assuming the association dues when the plats are submitted to the county, then no resale in 2020. They'll sell their first unit, their first home to a buyer in 2021. When they resell or sell to the first owner, then it goes to the working capital line of your spreadsheet. Is that correct?
So when they pull the plat, that's when they can be ready to start building. So when they pull the county plat, that's when we bill them. And you had discussed that with David Holm and the other guy when they were with us. And then I assume, and I have made an assumption, if you go down the working capital line to the 174, the 180, right there under calendar year 221, that's how many I assumed were sold in that year.
Are you assuming all 175 platted units are sold in that year?
Yes. If you go over to the right, and Sandra, look to the right, see?
Okay, I see.
So in other words, the plats were all pulled in 21. I assume 175 sales there, and I assume 104 sales the next year. And because it doesn't matter what time during the year it's sold, because you collect it on the change of ownership. You have one question? Just one, though. Go ahead, say something quickly. Just say it out loud.
Clarification, according to the charter, you can start counting a vote and getting revenue when the plat is approved by the county. So when you say it's pulled, it's kind of a colloquial term. According to the charter, it's when it's approved by the county, not when it's.
Just want that lag time in there.
Okay.
But I think the real clarification for those watching at home also, association dues are plats approved by county. That goes to for the expenses and the offsetting revenue. That's what you're paying annually. new homeowners that move into this community pay another annual assessment, and that goes into working capital. Separate fund completely, utilized for, right now being utilized for building new parks and enhancing existing amenities.
And that,
It's a one-time assessment.
it's a one-time assessment that is
One-time.
part of your closing cost when you take title to the home,
Right.
which is what we've tried to reflect here. And the other, I'm not gonna argue with Gary, because Gary knows it better than me, but at the end of the day, whether it's December, January, the timeframe's about right. Make sense? And everybody
This is a
sees
useful
over there like,
framework. This
pardon?
is a very useful framework for.
Okay, thanks.
thinking.
So the biggest question I have is, this is based on their projections, although you've modified it a little
Yeah,
more.
but I don't think it's unrealistic. So let me explain why. They have told us they're already, they're doing all the legal work right now to pull the plats because they want to start building, because they need to get the revenue
need
flows
money.
going. I thought the biggest risk would be 2 and 3, but then I saw after the meeting where they just spent 16 million on phase 2. So if you spend 16 million, you're gonna do it. So I feel phases 1 and 2 are locked and loaded, and phase 3 has much more risk as to timeliness and all that type of stuff. But I think 1 and 2 make a lot of sense. The answer is, could it be 2022 or 23? Are we gonna have a recession? Who's gonna be the president? You know, there's a million things that could impact timing somewhat, but it,
And just to clarify, the resale, the fee that we charge towards the working capital on a resale is how much per unit?
well, no. So let's be clear here, though. Pulling the plat and building the home is one thing. So it's not a resale, it's a first sale.
I got that, I'm asking about the.
And on a resale, we pull the whole thing again.
the same-
So you pay the whole
It's
fee
like an
again.
impact
I've
fee.
assumed no resales.
And we charge that amount based on the charter? Is that where our authority comes for the resale?
It's an amendment to
That's
the
our
charter.
amendment.
Yes.
That's the amendment we voted on.
Yes.
A couple of years ago.
2014.
About 4 years ago.
Yeah, so every time somebody,
Sells their home.
when I bought a new home in 2017,
Yeah.
You got
my wife
Yep,
and I
I
got
got hit with
together.
it too.
I'm simply asking the question, the two are linked right now, it's exactly the same amount.
Correct. They're always
They're always
linked.
Always.
I know.
Okay.
I got that.
Okay.
I'm asking why they're exactly the same. Is it because we're required to make them the same, or is it because we decided at some point in the distant past to make them the same?
It's in the amendment.
The way the amendment's written, it says, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't know exactly what the wording is, but it's equal to 1 year's assessment. So it doesn't have a number amount in there, it ties it directly to the annual assessment.
Which is why my model changes the assessment and inflation just against it.
Which is
Taking it
easy to
right into
defend,
that.
it's logical.
And back to David's question about the assumption of the plats being approved by the county next year, we're at $120,000, $130,000 of revenue there. As a calculated risk, all the factors that Brian's laid out, they're behind schedule. They have every incentive to start bringing in revenue. So it makes sense to utilize this revenue in next year's budget to offset assessments, to bring down the overall assessment for the community, just because we're pretty confident right now that they're going to be ready to go.
Well, we didn't say it here, but they told us they're going to be selling homes in 2020.
Exactly.
We pushed it out into 2021. So they're ready to go live, is where they're at.
They have to
And
go
they're-
live. They don't
the
have a
reason-
choice.
The reason they reorganized and David was here and everything is they're putting a whole new sales team, oversight team, everything.
So we now have different speakers, because a couple of years ago, things were going to be opening like now.
They have now put the team in place that they want to execute this strategy.
So would it be smarter for us to be a little more conservative and not use all of this? That's just a question.
No, my answer to that would be no, because we're only working on 1 year's budget, which is 2020, and I think 2020 is probably darn good. The rest of it into the future is noise that we will continue to update as we get better information. I don't think this is an exhibit for the board and the community to say, this is what could happen. So now, let me keep going into working capital and everything like that, because that's really where this becomes important.
So maybe make that as a explanatory note that this is not a commitment, this is a projection.
For what we send out to the community, we will only send out 2020.
Okay.
They won't
They won't
be
see
given
it.
this.
So last question, Island Village has talked about a phase 4.
Well, Right
Is
now,
there
we
any
have phase
discussion about
one.
that?
I don't know about a phase 4. I've heard that terminology
They've
before,
had that
but we
from
got
the
1,
beginning.
2, and 3 given to us.
This is the first time I've seen
So,
only 3.
Yeah, and that's what was talked about the other day, and it's what was in David's email back to me.
Okay.
So that's what's right
So
now.
there may not
And
be
they
a
may
phase-
have combined
there may
phases
not be
or
a phase
something,
4.
or they may have combined it when they were
Yeah, if you
expecting
look
it.
at the size of what they just purchased, it's quite sizable, they may have
Yeah.
combined it.
Originally, they were buying one island at a time, and if you look at the 16 million, it's 2 islands, so they may have combined phases 2 and 3.
Probably because they're behind.
And we have our next ad hoc meeting with them on Wednesday of this week, so hopefully we'll be able to get some more up-to-date information on what they have.
Okay, let me roll. So let's go to page 5 of 9. Okay, so what I did on page 5 of 9 is I took the same period, 2020 through 2026. Association dues, 2020, and then we just saw before. Association dues, I just grew them by 2% a year for the inflation. Association dues Island Village is the blue line there at the top. Everybody see it?
Yes.
And that goes 132, 285, 460, 625, 717, all the way out to, in 2026, there's 1,075. Now, as a sanity check, which is how I caught the error that I told you guys about yesterday, I said if there's 4,321 units and they have 979 and you divide 970, you should get the exact same math, and that's when I said, crap, I got an error. So I build in audits all over the place. So, you know, and it makes kind of sense. 4,300 units or 4,748, 1,000 units, it would be 1,075,000. So that is an additional annual revenue stream from Island Village. It's a good chunk of money. Now, what I did under trash service fees, I don't worry about. I adjusted for
So,
inflation. But
just
it's
a point, trash service you did not increase for Island Village at this point?
No, I didn't, because I don't care, because at the end of the day, it's an in and out.
I know
You
it's an
so
in and out, but-
I did not on here, and that's
Maybe that's
actually.
worthy of a note.
It's probably a good point that it should have been there. But it's an in and out, so,
I understand, right.
but I did not, to be honest with you.
Which is,
I didn't think
which is
about it.
fine.
No, it's good. Okay, so then we got recreation fees, apartments, which go into working capital, and we got working capital contribution, which is the sales of units. Now, we always assume 300 a year. David had asked in an email this weekend, just 300. Aggressive, conservative, we've beaten 300 quite regularly, and if we go into a recession, we won't. But it's a fair number for what we do.
And I think as you start including Island Village, so if an investor
I've got a different
buys.
line here entirely.
Okay, good. But if an investor buys a house, they would pay the assessment, and if they turn around and sold it to somebody else, then that homeowner would pay that also. So we'd probably have to start looking at more houses come into the community, that 25 start going up a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm not.
But that's years down the
But
road.
that, I want to stay conservative for now.
Right.
So then under recreation fees, we've got the 300 apartments, you can see where those get beefed in there. And we've got the sales of home in there. And all these numbers would tie to the Island Village page that you saw just before. Those yellow items equal the working capital contribution that you see in yellow underneath gross revenues. So just for the sake of the audience and those on TV, we have the gross revenues, but then what we do is we contra liability out, which is as a reduction to the revenue under how do you have to do the accounting, for what goes to our working capital fund or what goes to our replacement reserves. So, you know, the rest of it is just adjusted for inflation. Steve had made the comment to me, maintenance income, Island Village, $20 per unit. I put in 0 across there because I wasn't sure where it's not really, that's usually for service areas.
It'll be as service areas come on board.
If there are
Because-
any.
Right, well, we know that there's going to be an initial townhomes in the first phase.
Okay.
service areas.
And we are definitely going to be doing that as a service area?
Well, just the townhomes, not entire Island Village. I
Right,
think I want to make sure that there's
No, I
clarification
understand what
on
you're
this.
saying, I'm just wondering, is there any way to avoid getting any more service areas? I
I got it on there as a placeholder, and I put 0 revenue, and I am really not a fan of service
I would
areas.
really love to avoid the service area thing if we could pull it off, just saying,
Well,
it's a nightmare.
That's probably a good point to bring up on Wednesday's
I-
ad hoc meeting.
If you could
Okay.
please bring that ad hoc meeting agenda item, that would be
Okay.
awesome.
I lumped all items under 75,000.
I'm assuming I'm in
I'm
just
rolling, I'm
consensus.
rolling.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
All items under 70.
I'm dying.
All items under 75,000 I lump for both revenues and expenses, just adjust for inflation.
Can I just ask about the replacement reserves? You said you used Lakeside as a proxy. Could you explain that just a little bit more?
Sure, so you got the replacement reserves, there's 2 lines there. There's 813,000, which I grow 2% per, Well, I didn't grow it, I used the engineering study to grow that. And then I put in Lakes, they're gonna have a, the reason I use Lakeside is they're going to have an amenity out there, which is the pool and meeting room, and it's gonna have a weight room, gym, and all that type of stuff. I don't know what else they're really gonna have for parks and stuff like that, so I threw in Lakeside because it's one of our more expensive areas with everything out there, and I said, at least it's not forgotten, and
It's a
it's
place
there.
It needs to be there.
Yeah.
And so we would actually do that replacement reserve study on the next round?
We would do it on the next round, but we are not going to wait until the next round and play dumb. We're actually, when it starts going in line, we're going to go.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's why.
Okay,
Yeah, start it now.
let me keep going. I said I wanted to get through all this. Okay, so joint committee, I've grown for inflation and all that. If you go down to the blue at the bottom of the line, incremental island village expenses. I have no idea what they are. But what I did here is this makes it balance. And you can see 161 goes to 281, goes to 450. Do I really think we're gonna spend 896,000 on Island Village? No way. But not when we're spending $1 million on the rest of CROA. So this became a balancing thing, it becomes an informational thing. I think at the end of the day, we will force the management company to be more efficient than just doubling everything because we got Island Village. So I think there will be some revenue enhancement possibility out there in the future. It's way too premature to be
Well, the
guessing.
management company will be able to give you more comparable expense rates based on knowing what the actual amenity is gonna be.
Right now you have
Or
no-
premature.
And you should be able to take efficiencies, because when you, yeah, I would think.
Right, but at least, right, but at least you see this number here, you know there is revenue. There's more revenue in here than we're going to have expense. There's room in here. Okay, so let's go to 6 of 9. We have, beginning, let's start under 2020. You'll see the 400,000 there under 2020, about 3 or 4 lines down. So let's say we end this year with 400,000 in the working capital fund. Everybody see that 400?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then if we add in for recreation fee for apartments and working capital contributions, and then we start adding in Island Village, you can see where working capital in the bottom right would grow itself to $7,190,000. So I said, that's too big a number and probably doesn't totally reflect reality. So let's go to 7 out of 9, because then I said, let's kill a couple of birds with one stone. We've talked, when we talk about the parks plan, you know, number one request was a community center. Stetson has been talked about as a possibility that we could possibly purchase in the future, maybe move town hall to Stetson and have this become a community center. There's different options. We're thinking about anything, because if we build from scratch, we're going to build something that costs 200% of budget and is very expensive. So, you know, so I looked at it and I said, okay, if the cost of a community center was $3 million, I'm just here in the top left, and we put down a down payment of $1 million out of cash, we'd have a $2 million financing cost. And then I said our annual interest cost, and actually it's principal plus interest, would be the 143 going across there. I did a 20-year loan. Simple math. 30-year estimate reserving fund requirements. I used the 859 building as a proxy, $112,000 a year, looking at average expenses. And then, through the magic of a person in the community, I had Stetson's actual expenses on a run rate type basis, so I said, let's use that as a proxy. So you can see under year 1, 2, 3 going across there, the issue that I care most about, and I'm going to talk with Gary a little bit about this, because I actually think I still think we need a sentence or two in the charter that says you can't make a major acquisition without thinking about run rate expenses and reserve impacts. Because at the end of the day, spending $3 million is it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for a community this size. Spending $3 million and then having run rate expenses of $500,000 a year in perpetuity or going up is a heck of a lot of money. And I'm afraid people want to be here conquering heroes and spread the good news, but you know, $500,000 is a lot of money. And we can argue whether that number could be cut to 4.25 or whether it should be 550. It doesn't matter. It's a big number. So then what I did on page 9 of 9 was I took, on 6 of 9, I had the revenue, or 8 and 9, sorry, I apologize. On 8 and 9, I said, okay, let's take the exact same sheet I had showed you before, but then let's drop in the $1 million for a community center, the cash coming out there. And then I said, let's put in those run rate impact, let's put in another $500,000, because if you had a building, you're gonna have to do retrofits, you're gonna have to put in furniture, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't done something on here, like, we know we got the CCD road that we're gonna have to pay for $200,000 a year and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, if you go to the bottom right, you find out that $7 million is now $2.7 million. And then David's comment earlier about, does Island Village Phase 3 really get done on time, becomes very relevant. So if we end up in the purpose of this whole package here, let's say, okay, 2020, I think we got a pretty darn good budget with a couple of conversations we need to have. And when we talk about the future and some of these projects that we have been talking about a little, Stetson Community Center and stuff that's gonna come out of what David talks about with Parkland, you know, this is the reality of our situation, and we're going to make sure that this board and other boards stay educated on this, because it really does matter, because what looks like a big pot of money starts getting chewed up. And the last thing I did on page 9 was just, you know, I had the numbers from 13, 17, 19, 20. I still need additional information from Steve, but, you know, here we can talk about what was our head count, what is our head count. I need it for this budget. If there's any changes, you know, we can look at total comp, we can look at add-ins and stuff like that. Because then we can sit here and we can start saying, because if we roll this forward into the future, we ought to talking about what kind of efficiencies are we going to get with Island Village, so that we're not taking 44 to 62 and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff going here. And my theory here, whether I get reelected or not, is that at least the future boards are starting to think about the impacts into the next decade, because it's easy to see Island Village revenue signs and say, we're rich. We can do this, we can do this, we can do this, and I've heard people say, not only should we do them, we should just do them all at once.
So are you suggesting this can't be solved on Facebook's back porch?
I didn't say that.
I'm just curious, I'm sure it'll get figured out.
Okay, so now you've got the picture of the 9 pages. I will take as many questions as the board has, and audience members, if you come up, name, number, serial number, all that good junk, and we'll start a conversation.
Gary,
come on up. But the goal here is by the time we're done with this conversation, we agree we got a 2020 budget or we don't.
Gary Hudspeth, 1471 Resolute Street. I want to compliment Brian on this outstanding work, because it takes current expenses and revenues and projects them out far enough to where you don't, as long as everyone agrees with the assumptions, and I think they're very accurate, you can plan ahead. It'll be after you're not here, but some future board can use this as a baseline. So this is outstanding. The one item that I wanted to confirm with you is on page 4 of 9, where it talks about Island Village impacts. And I'm only looking at the 2020. I want to let you know that in a separate conversation I had at the end of last month with David Hume, I was looking at number of votes for the charter. So the prediction of 51 units in February is within 1 unit of what he and I talked about. Projection of 109 units by the middle of March is within about 4 or 5 of what he and I talked about. So I think these estimates are very accurate, and that's what I'm looking at for a vote count. Mattamy Homes will have approximately 50 votes before March the 4th to vote on the charter amendments. That's their number.
That's an I hadn't even thought about. That's very interesting thing, yeah, because they'll be able to vote. And the election for officers.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, there has been a question passed from past boards about developers voting a chunk when you have a majority of the board, and next year's election is a majority of the board.
Ultimately, we cannot tell them no because they have owner's rights. However, we can ask them nicely, we'd like them to refrain, or we can say, can you please vote for
No. By the way, did she not say that? We're not joking.
I have a favor I'd like to ask, though.
Well, can I just clarify Vanessa's statement real quick, though? There's nothing wrong with, if you're campaigning and I've done this with the last elections, I sent to the developer, here's a list of questions that I'm willing to ask the candidates, and they can respond directly back to you, so that can give you some information to warrant your vote. And that's what we've done the past couple of times. What we would never do, though, is for me or anybody on my team to tell the developer who they should be voting for. It would strictly be up to you all answering.
Well, I don't think that there's ever been a time when anyone has ever said from the board or otherwise to a developer that these are the ones.
Right, exactly.
Go ahead, Gary, you got time.
Just so you know, this exact subject about the developer votes is going to be discussed tonight at the charter meeting with legal presence. He has an opinion on this. Now, it could change in the charter to be voted on, but we're going to discuss that issue tonight.
Very good.
Okay, specific question. Let's focus on 2000. Come on up, please.
20.
Mike Jackson, 413 Sycamore Street, Green Bay Packer fan.
That's the tablecloth.
I dressed for success today. On the developer vote, just a first comment on that. I remember a lot of conversation that we were going to fix that somehow. Now, maybe we're going to fix it in the charter this time, but I was almost under the impression that we'd fixed it previously. Not the case, apparently.
You can't.
Yeah, I think fixing is kind of a relative word. I know the boards talked about it in the past, and they agreed, the past boards agreed that they would send to David Weekley to not vote, but at that time, David Weekley ended up selling all their homes before they could even vote in a majority election.
It's again, because it's actually part of statutes. They have part of owners' rights, because we did look into it when I was on the board, because we discussed it a couple of years ago. And because they own the property, they are considered owners, and they have legal rights to be able to vote on anything. So we can't fix that. What we can do is use our influence and just say, here's our recommendation.
And I read the stuff yesterday leading up to tonight's conversation. What they can't do is they cannot control or vote for a majority of the
Right.
board. But with 51 votes in a town where we have 800,000 votes for an election,
They
they don't have control of the town. They are a block voter.
Yeah, I don't know the legal aspects. I haven't looked at the language or anything like that, but certainly they're in a different class of owner in the community. And I would think you can draw a distinction because they do not have a long-term relationship with the community. They're not going to stay here and have to live with their cooking, but they're going to influence the governance of the community. I would think if we got a good lawyer, you could figure out a way to put them in a separate class, because they certainly do not parallel or mimic a owner that is typical of what we think of as an owner. So why should they be entitled to these certain rights? So I would just give you that challenge. I think that should be looked at.
I think we've done that, but we
Yeah,
can certainly. We have several legal opinions about the same situation. So,
Okay.
yeah, we really have been pushing this. So I promise you, both boards that I've been on have been all over it, because this has been a repeated issue. There has not been a change in the legal opinion. Gary, I'm sure that even with your, because we talked about it even in the charter, what can we do in the charter? It's pretty consistent. You cannot challenge, regardless if you reclassify them, it won't matter, because it is still their legal right to vote.
The change would have to be at the legislative
Yeah.
level.
Okay,
All right, second thing. Brian's been very conservative here, I know that, and that's the purpose, and I would echo Gary's comments. Brian, you did a great job. Page 8, in talking about the inner workings of, potential community center and what the financing would look like and the impact on the capital fund, and Brian and I had a discussion about this previously. Depending upon what building or what circumstance we're in, there could be some rent offset here, and it could be fairly significant, so keep that placeholder in your minds as you work through it. Thanks.
To follow up on Mike's comment there, if we were to purchase the Stetson building, you could possibly rent a floor for a couple $100,000 a year. So I mean, it's real money. When Mike and I spoke about this, I chose to not put rent in here because if you do your own build, there may be zero rent. But it's hard, but it's a very fair fact.
Well, rent and programming fees and those sorts of.
I mean,
Yes, I mean. Okay. Eileen Barr, 1138 Mosaic Drive. Couple of notes. On the townhouses in Island Village, one of the things that struck me as we've gotten into this discussion about service areas is, and we haven't had this discussion, is perhaps encouraging or looking into the possibility that some of our service areas, not that this is so much better, but we are working on some issues about turning into a condo rather than a service area, and that they become condos. Vanessa looks confused.
I don't recall service areas becoming condos, I know apartments becoming condos.
Right, we talked about apartments becoming condos, but maybe perhaps, yes, but we also put in some.
Because they're kind of service areas kind of are condos.
Right, but perhaps they should really become under our.
I think the distinction is.
Condo label.
Independent, that you want them independent.
Independent,
yes.
but, perhaps with some restrictions in terms of their relationship with, in other words, to achieve the same thing that, they do their roof all together and it complies with what we want to do.
Right.
Okay, that was the first thing. On lifeguards, I think it's the way to go. I would like to make the comment that I think there may be times when we actually have to have a lifeguard. It doesn't necessarily have to be a separate budget item. It would be.
you are 100% correct. If there's
Special
a
events.
swimming lesson type thing going on, you have to have a lifeguard.
But it's
Right.
part of with that
Fair.
event.
Yeah,
Right.
So since she breached that subject, let's talk about lifeguards, because I'd be interested in the public in that. I mean, you heard me before. My opinion, and I'm opening this up for a totally open dialogue, is we either have no lifeguards or we do lifeguards right. Because and Mary Ann shaking her head, she knows this stuff even better than me with the Boys and Girls Club, or Scouts, sorry.
Girl Scouts.
But we need all five to be consistent, whatever our policy is, because today, if something went wrong, I think we have opened homeowners up to the worst liability. So with that, take it away. Go ahead, Mary Ann, what do you
Yeah,
think?
well, I think, yes, because right now it's inconsistent in terms of where lifeguards are, at what pools, at what times, and, yeah, kind of having this quasi situation is very negative for us from a liability standpoint. I think going with no lifeguards at all is a better idea, I mean, in terms of a liability standpoint. And then, yes, if you're holding a swim meet or you're holding a swim lesson that we are a part of supporting, then you are mandated, and it is in your best interest to have lifeguard protection there. I mean, this is, I think, going to be a tough one in the community, though, particularly for a lakeside pool.
Go ahead, I'm
No,
sorry.
you go ahead.
The other thing that I think in conjunction with what you were saying, also our summer event. When we have our summer, we will have, summer breakouts. When we have summer breakout, that would be included in the event or in the program.
Right.
If it's an organized activity that's being organized under the auspices of CROA, then we would need to do
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
I think that part of the challenge, I mean, I've read the opinion from council, and I think it's pretty clear.
And our insurance company.
And our insurance company. I think it's pretty clear that we are holding ourselves in a very precarious position from a liability standpoint, doing what we're doing right now. So that is not an acceptable alternative at all. No matter how much pushback there is from the community, unless we're prepared to put lifeguards at every pool for every hour it's open, we are liable much more than by taking all lifeguards out. The second part of this is that we're not competitive from a hiring standpoint with the water parks and the growth of the theme parks and so on. Not because we're trying to be cheap, but it's just hard to hire temporary seasonal employees and pay them enough when they can get benefits and more from much bigger corporations. I would like to see us then, when we're doing something like summer breakout, hire a third party who is in the lifeguard business to staff us with lifeguards, just like we hire security guards or others. And that's where we put that resource. I think it's important to explain, however, because the discussions come up under the budget. It looks like we're trying to save $53,000. I want to be clear. I would do this if it saved us 53 cents. It is a bad decision to put lifeguards at some pools for some times. And it has the added benefit, perhaps, of reducing part of our expense, but that is not the reason to do it.
A lot of communities have been discussing this, and Florida law has really evolved. That is, so I'm not casting aspersion at a board 8 years ago and what they may have decided for whatever reason.
It was a different situation.
We are in a different situation today, whether you talk about, even our insurance carrier, and you would think an insurance carrier's first answer would be is always have a lifeguard, and our insurance carrier says, well, having a little bit of a lifeguard is the dumbest strategy you can have, because all it does is put the insurance carrier at more risk too, because the requirements for a lifeguard now are pretty serious about safety, about how they have to be trained, control they have to have and everything. I'm not sure we have proper camera oversight even of all that stuff today. So I think we have a whole swimming pool evolution process that needs to happen here.
Yes, and I'm sorry, Dan.
No.
I'm in support of what you're saying about using a qualified entity, because it spreads the risk, and you're also ensured that who you're bringing on board is fully, vetted by the standards of that organization, that in order to be who they are, has to be accredited by another organization. So you're really bringing in a better safety product, but you're also spreading your risk, which for us is an important aspect as well.
I think there's a very real possibility that line item over the time could actually increase, because now we have somebody else coming in. But we are minimizing our risk, which I think over the long haul is therefore saving the association a lot of money and potential lawsuits.
So two separate items. One is, if we wanted to do it right, if we follow the insurers and the legal opinion, and we wanted to do it right, all pools, when open, at competitive rates and appropriately qualified, vetted, what is that cost? Because I think there is a cost factor. If we wanted to do it right, is it $300,000? I mean, right now, it's Lakeside is 58.7. Would it be
That's for
300?
part of the time.
Right, that's for part of the time. So what would it be? Because I think cost is a factor if we were to do it right.
But
it might be $500,000.
But I think it's a good point that should be a known.
I think we
for
need to
discussion.
specify what it would cost. I mean, I'm guessing. I'm just extrapolating.
If we
All
were
pools,
doing-
all times.
Right, if we were doing all pools, we talked about it, just a safe assumption of at least 5 times the amount of what you see in there right now. And that's a part-time
That's
number.
It's part-time. So if we wanted it when the pools are open, all hours, that's probably $500,000.
Well, one of the things, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, but that was the one thought. The other thought is, and just want to clarify something you said, the other thought is, with this budget, there is no line item, so, right, for lifeguards. So should we do a contracted service, that would be paid for by the event?
Correct.
So if we sponsor an event, that's part of that cost for that event. So it's really budget neutral? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
It would be in the event or the program line item.
In that program line item, so that would now be added to it, or is it?
How is that? So we have a separate summer breakout worksheet that
Right.
accounts for the lifeguards that would be needed for summer breakout. We would probably need to adjust that slightly, just because we're using a third party and the fees would go up a little bit, but I don't think it's mission critical to the budget overall.
Okay.
I think it's something that could be absorbed.
And we would, our standards for using lifeguards at that, when we use that third party, pretty high standards for that lifeguard company. I mean, do we have standards above what a lifeguard organization?
There's really 2 major companies that do the lifeguard certification. It's Red Cross and Jeff Ellis, and we utilize Jeff Ellis. So we would say that they would need to utilize one or the other.
Okay, that's fair.
So, you good? I'm sorry.
I'm good on are we still on lifeguards, or are we?
I'm wrapping up lifeguards. So
I
on
just-
lifeguards, we are saying, oh, you got a comment?
I have one quick
Go ahead,
comment.
go ahead.
I think that if we're going to be doing, if your directive was, we need an estimate for that, our estimate needs to come from Jeff Ellis
Yeah,
or
sure.
Red Cross. I don't want,
Should be
because
like
we need to be
multiple
out of the
process.
lifeguard business. We need an independent company that's going to help to diversify our risk.
Well, to get them, I mean, I think we have to utilize some of our historical numbers for an estimate of what it would cost to do all 5 pools. If we're just talking about an estimate for covering programs, I think that that's something we would go to Jeff Ellis or Red Cross and say, we need to know what you would charge for something like this.
But what I'm saying is, based on what I'm hearing from the board, is we would not want it to be CCMC doing the hiring for that. We would
Correct.
want it to be Jeff Ellis that we are hiring for, or Red Cross.
Right, so you're saying if, as an assumption, if we were to staff every pool in the community, right now CCMC utilizes Jeff Ellis.
Right.
So that we
But
don't
they're
have the.
but they're CCMC employees.
Correct, so we're saying if we were to do this, we would have to go to Jeff Ellis, and that's not how that necessarily works. We'd have to find a company that either uses Jeff Ellis or Red Cross as their.
Okay.
But remember, we're paying a load. When CCMC hires someone, part-time or full-time, there's their
Yeah, bill
pay
rate.
and then there's a load. If this is coming from a third party, we're just moving the load figure from CCMC to the owner.
Let's have Steve get us as good an estimate as he can. We agree we're gonna use a Jeff Ellis or something for what we have lifeguards, so that at least we're protecting us, the homeowners association, as much as possible. Everybody agree we're on the same page for lifeguards?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and my recommendation would be that that when we go to adopt or send this budget out, we send it.
We're gonna explain it. We're gonna have a
Yeah.
paragraph on
But that
lifeguards.
it's,
We have
as
to.
you put it in,
We're
there
gonna,
is no.
we're gonna talk about
lifeguards.
Island Village and lifeguards.
And it's
Okay.
based on change of state law?
And I think Eileen had, we stopped.
You still
Eileen
okay?
Finish, and I do have one more thing about lifeguards.
Okay, go ahead.
As Jackson will tell you, and I think Vanessa also, very often at Parks and Rec, there is a discussion that someone wants to use the pool, and we say they have to supply lifeguards, and I think the idea that the board basically sets a standard and decides that there's one particular group that they should use, one outside organization, rather than just say to somebody, you have to bring a lifeguard. I mean, that's just that might be a
That's it. I
good way.
100% support that, because the last thing we need is for somebody to say that my
cousin.
uncle's daughter had been a lifeguard occasionally,
I
and
watched-
she can come here.
I watched a couple episodes of Baywatch.
I mean, that is actually highlighted as the worst liability you can think of.
Okay, 2 more comments.
Go ahead.
I'm going to the next item on the agenda, but if we are really going to be bringing up the idea of a community center, I have always been a proponent of taking a serious look at the 851 building, and I would not really like to see money being spent on any part of it until we make some kind of decision. And then, quite honestly, I mean, Jerry and I were talking about it back there, I think perhaps, and I know that's not part of this discussion, but given the way things go, I should say when I have an opportunity, that the community center is probably going to cost more than $3 million, even if we're talking about retrofitting, and I am happy to see that I was not the only person in answering the survey who talked about alternate financing.
So, let me just tackle a couple of your things here. I'll speak for myself, and the board can opine one way or another, but one of the reasons we have listened carefully to Stetson is, my belief is, if you could get Stetson for $3 million, hint, hint, then you could move town hall there, you could retrofit this building, you would make this town hall, and you would rent out part of the Stetson building, and I think there are pros and cons to Stetson, and I understand it in spades. But yes, if we build a new community center, then the number's going to be $5 to $8 million, because we do nothing cheap. It's just our track record. So if you started here and you had an existing building and you retrofitted this to work on day one, you could buy yourself 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and 9 to put on a second floor, to do this, to do that. You let things evolve, and if Stetson never happens and we end up in a completely new conversation around a town hall, then your comments are very apropos, which is why I said I want to talk to Gary, because I do think we need a sentence or two in the charter that says you can't spend more than X dollars without talking about reserve impacts, run rate impacts, and everything. You've got to educate the community somehow. I don't think that's happened in the past, and we're having the value now of post-haste learning things. So your comments are very good.
Okay, thank you.
Other board members on her comments, or disagree, agree?
I think you're right.
Okay.
I have another item I'd like to talk
Go.
about. And I know this will be,
Budget related, right?
I know this will irritate some of you. I want to talk about the legal fees again. And I want to clarify a couple of things. First of all, you cannot budget or anticipate what you don't know is coming. So there is no real way to figure out this number, and so I think you've done it exactly the right way. So, yay you. However, do you want to respond before I go to however?
Susan, God bless her, continued to work this weekend and got me answers. So let me just give you some answers.
I did get an email at 10 o'clock on Sunday night from Susan. I don't know why in God's name you're working at 10 o'clock Sunday night, but
Well, I
thank you.
meant to delay it so you wouldn't get it until the morning, but
I was trying to figure out how in God's name Kansas City couldn't score. Go ahead.
So, CROA, there's roofing litigation going on in this town. Those expenses are not CROA expenses. CROA is fronting the legal fees. That will be settled as part of the settlement. So what we have discussed with Coal Association is it will be credit cash, debit receivable from service area. The service area will have an expense and a contingent liability. Ultimately, it is the service area's expense. We have $1.4 million, $1.5 million of operating cash, and we're making a short-term interest rate or interest-free rate loan to do that. So from a budgeting perspective, that is not an expense item, so it's why it's not in here.
And we're doing it because they are a service area.
And we have had legal correspondence that says part of the advantage of being a part of an organization like CROA is you can do things like this, and it's in the best interest of all homeowners to do this. So that is what we're doing. So
And we have an opinion from our accountant that that's an appropriate.
yes, accountant
procedure.
agrees, lawyer agrees. So what we're doing, the right things, the process is underway. We do not want to be talking about the legal issues, everybody here, so I'm being purposely vague because of people on TV and the audience, but that is what we're doing. We'll spend the monies, we'll have the receivable, the homeowners are not at risk longer.
Right, and to just be explicit, what we are doing there is not creating a precedent for any other service area or part of the community. In other words, because we are handling these legal fees in this particular case, this is a one-off for this particular situation and should not be interpreted, at least in my view, by any other entity in the community, service area, condominium, 720 organization, to commit CROA to fronting legal fees in any other dispute. This is only for this specific item. Am I fair in saying that?
That's a correct statement.
And it would, as far as I can see, it would never happen with anything if it wasn't already even a service area. I could not ever see us doing anything like that, and it's because it's part of our service
Yeah,
area.
I just want it on tape, that
Yeah.
this is, I'm really impressed with what Gary's talked about creating a record in the charter task force. There will come a time when someone will come back and look at some of these tapes and say, well, you did this, and I want to be explicit that this board has said, no, we will handle each case on a case-by-case basis, and this does not create a precedent. Now, having said that, we have other litigation that we are involved with different entities in town in which we are not in which we are in an adversarial position. And there are legal fees associated with those items.
Which is in here as an expense.
Right. And so those items do show up as best we can anticipate what might be coming up. And then we have the fees for general counsel, which is the day-to-day stuff, and we have the extra amount for the charter completion. So I just want to say I'm signing off on this legal fee amount. I think it's an appropriate amount, given what we know about the current world. And with the accountant's blessing on the other, I'm fine with that. So. And with that, everyone leaves the room.
actually declared the room.
Not the last time.
For the first.
I have one other item that I'd just like to ask a quick question about. We've talked about security guards at Lakeside, and I know that we had a contract through December, I believe. Is that factored into this budget anywhere?
Security guards are not in here, the new bollards are.
Okay.
We're working under the assumption that, and we've also got more, Steve left, but we got more monitors and stuff like that in here, so we're thinking
other security
that
approaches.
the bollard approach at Lakeside with monitors for both the athletic field and that work to solve our solution.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I have
Go ahead.
one item, this goes to page, what is that on yours, the Stetson Community Center item
Page
7?
7
7 of 9.
or 8 of 9?
Actually,
7 of 9.
Bottom, very
Yeah,
bottom.
yeah. Page 7 of 9.
Okay.
The line called real estate and intangible taxes. So should that property become ours, do we pay taxes? Because I don't see much in tax. I see $2,200 in our CJC budget. So it seems like a different tax rate.
I thought about.
That's just a question.
No, it's a fair question. I actually thought about it when I put it there, and I didn't make additions or deletions on any other line. So what I did was I said, I'll just take Stetson's
Oh, this is-
budget. Literally, it's Stetson's
They're private,
actual
that's their line.
expenses.
Got it.
And when I said before, when we sharpen our pencil, the 500,000 could be 425 and it could be 550.
Okay.
And I don't know the answer, so at least I can say I fairly had a
So
baseline for
this
something.
is their expense,
Right.
ours may be different, because we pay less, we pay different taxes.
Does anybody from the community have any other comment that you want to make before we say we're moving to finalize this? I'm stalling because I would love for Steve and Mary Ann to come back.
You got another.
You got to come up, please.
Say where you live.
Disclose all.
Name, address, and serial number.
Competing.
Sandra Kensel, 708 Gulf Park Drive. I'm the boss. Yes, you are. And I just have one question on page 7 of 9, under Stetson. You have electricity and you have heating and AC. Is that just maintenance on the heating and AC?
I believe it is. I think because it was an older air handler, and they replaced some, but not all of them, I think that was part of the expense. But these were back of the hand kind of expenses that a third party had put together for a run rate
Okay.
on the building. So we don't know
I
exactly.
think these are
what those things
Stetson's
were.
real expenses that were provided to a third party.
Yeah, so I'm just trying
So-
to basically, if that's the maintenance on older units, which I think that's substantial, I don't know how many units they have, would be the cost if you were having to retrofit that building for all new AC units? Has
Yeah.
anybody figured that into? Because those, having done this before with the Community Hope Center, I know that those costs are significant when you go to add new ones on older buildings.
On page 8 of 9, we put in 500,000 for retrofitting and stuff like that. I mean, the answer to your question, very honestly, is if we were to proceed with the Stetson building, we'd have to do a detailed analysis.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Last comment?
go ahead.
I echo what Gary said. Thank you. This was
Very well done.
so helpful in going through the process. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And bond delegated off.
Good satisfaction.
So,
For the record.
I am making a motion, we'll be looking for a second. The motion will be that this 2020 budget as presented on pages 1 and 2 of 9 will be adopted by the board. We are I'll let Rachel type away. So we're adopting this budget with the increases in the numbers as shown in here. Steve will work on finalizing the budget and take a first draft of a letter from me, and then I'll review it, and then we're gonna get it out to the full board. You'll just have to watch this on tape. On Thursday, we're gonna get out the email flash, and on Friday, we talk about it in the big thing, and then we mail as soon as possible. May I have a second?
Second.
I just want to add one word to that, though.
Sorry, was that David?
David, second.
It was, but I want to make sure you're okay with this motion and second, can we just make sure when we're saying that you're adopting the draft budget?
Yes.
Yes.
Not the budget.
And a clarification on this, do we vote on the CJC budget? Because you said pages 1 and 2.
I think both of these
separate.
combined right now through this motion as draft budget will be acceptable. And then when you go to approve the final budget, we'll have them as two separate agenda items.
But for now, could the motion read
Okay.
pages 1 through 4?
CROA and
1 through
CJ,
3.
CROA and CJC,
1 to
pages
3.
1 through 3.
1 through 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So
I'm good with that.
I confirm my second.
All right, then, Rachel, you can watch on TV and straighten it out. So we got, I'm making the motion, David second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
You okay, Rachel?
Got it.
She listened to the tape.
Could we take a 5-minute recess?
We'll take a 5-minute recess for purposes of the audience and people on TV. There are interesting things in here. If you want a copy of these exhibits that we have talked about, Town Hall will be happy to provide them with the 2026 type run rate type stuff. I know there's different projects going on. People are allowed to look at them, understand them, and certainly see me or any other board member with
And
questions.
if you're okay, we can post the entire packet online, the 1 through 9.
We'll be posting this, huh? Yes, no?
Well, yeah, but the actual detail has not been posted.
No, what I'm saying is on Thursday when we post.
Do we want to post this?
Or is it because, does it
My
become-
fear is if we post
I have a
it-
hesitation.
If we post this, the
Because
back
too
board will
confusing.
go nuts and no one will understand it. It's hard for.
Too confusing.
We're educating the people in the room. I would
Are
not
going to be
post this.
Just the
these.
CROA and CJC.
I would think, yeah, just
Or just the
1 to
the
3.
two budgets?
Just 1 to 3.
Just the budget.
3
yeah.
pages, they
One
just
to
voted.
three.
Yeah.
And you said we motioned and seconded for a break?
Yeah, 5-minute break.
Okay, let's, we're gonna get back together at 8
1-minute break,
till,
okay?
8 till
Yeah,
11.
woman break. So I was actually reading it to zero break.
It happens, you know?
I think the camera's gonna keep running, guys.
Camera's running, you're on film.
And the microphone, so everything's being picked up.
Got that.
Copy that. All right.
Hey, David, on the next item, I'm gonna turn it over to you to say where you and Steve can roll.
And you,
Not you. Yes, Jackson looks at him and Tom looks at him. No, you're right. Nobody gets looked at. But 2 people.
so, Brian, that was good. Heard nothing back from Steve about the date. I asked if he's. I'm gonna let him, I'm gonna let him do it.
Whatever we got.
I'll let him do it.
Okay.
But the data questions, I mean, someone's gonna ask me about the data, it's not clean. Because he hasn't got an answer yet. I mean, I'm just-
No, I don't argue with you. I read this stuff this weekend and it's,
downtown.
We good to go, Patrick?
Oh, the downtown.
All right, CROA board, okay, so
That pay me.
I'm calling this to order. We got, on October 23rd, we're going to have a board meeting in Town Hall. What I am recommending, or opening for discussion, is that we do a board meeting at 4 o'clock that ends by 5:15. It'll be crisp and sharp. And then we go from 5:15 to 6, where we do the wine, kibbutzing cheese like we normally do. Town Hall at 6 o'clock.
So there's gonna be wine and cheese while I have to be gone. Thanks. Appreciate
We'll
that.
save you some.
We'll save you some.
We can save
So then we
you
do the
some.
town hall at 6 o'clock. At the town hall, we had a Q&A type approach in the past. I think this time we probably start with me doing 2 minutes, and then we turn it over to David and Steve, and we've talked about the Parks and Facilities Plan doing no more than 6 to 8 slides, where we talk for 30 to 40 minutes about the Parks and Facilities Plan. I think we talked about what was the approach, thank everyone for their involvement, blah, blah, blah. Here are the highest priorities, and, you know, maybe we even talk about a couple of things we talked about prior here when we started to think about how the working capital fund could grow and stuff like that. Then we go to accomplishments. Do we do accomplishments before the facilities plan, or should I do a little bit of accomplishments for the year ahead of that? What do you think?
Accomplishments on.
Meaning like the athletic fields are in place and a couple things like that. So in other words, if we're going to have a Q&A, if we're going to have a town hall, do we talk about, we've been a very active board for the last 6 months, and the fields are now live, and Parks and Facilities Plan is done. Do we spend 5 minutes on that, and then at the end, open it up to Q&A from the audience?
I would, because that sets a framework.
So we'll kind of roughly plan on 6 o'clock to 6:10 will be Brian shooting the bull. Then we'll have 6:10 to 6:50, and I will keep you strict, being the parks plan. And then we go 6:50 until we're done Q&A. Is that a fair approach with everybody?
And when were you going to do your,
I'll take 10 minutes up front to just kind of talk about accomplishments. Thank you.
oh, so you're going to do it at the
I'm
beginning?
going to do it at the very
Okay, got
beginning.
it.
So the
All right.
very beginning will be me, big picture.
I guess my question is, do we want to, because people may not come in right in a timely manner? Do you want to do it before you open it to question and answer?
Yeah, that might be better, sandwich it in between the presentation and the Q&A.
Okay.
Because the presentation is gonna be interesting and uplifting, and then you kind of
I'll put
follow
them back
it.
to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, then you kind of crest that,
No,
right?
that's
You
fine.
crest it
So
with that.
I'll do 6 to 6:05 with an intro. And then what we'll do is we'll do 6:05 to 6:45 with the parks. And this is 6 to 8 slides, Steve and Dave, I want the whole board to see. And then we'll go to Q&A for an hour.
Do you want
I'll do-
a specific bullet item on budget, 2020 budget? Like highlights?
Budget will be something that ahead of the Q&A.
I think it would be ahead of Q&A. I'm wondering about a 5-minute, 5 or 10-minute summary. I mean,
So the-
a summary of your
starting
summary.
with. I thought that's what you were starting
I
with.
think,
Well, I'm starting with just high, like
Oh,
all
okay.
here type stuff. They did, this changed it. We'll go to parks.
It's a 5-minute.
Okay, and then I'll take, in my 10 or 15 minutes before the Q&A, I'll talk about the big picture budget items.
I think that would
Very
be
high level.
helpful to the
Yep.
community.
Okay.
Can I also just remind us that in years past, this has been an event that other entities have really wanted to hijack a little bit for their own meeting purposes. So that while we recognize the county might want to come and make a presentation, and the people who are interested in bike lanes might want to come and make a presentation, and other groups might want to do that. The agenda is our agenda.
Yep.
And it should remain our agenda. This is not a meeting for other people to come on top of that to be able to express their.
We're not going to have a county meeting that night.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already got a board meeting from 4 to 5:15, then we got the break. The whole evening's pretty full.
Right. Now, I'm going to preempt, I think, what Gary's coming up to say. We need to talk about the charter revision that night. And that could be Vanessa or Gary.
All right, so the
or-
board meeting's going to be at 1.
Just saying. But I think it's an important piece, and this is one of our best opportunities to talk about that.
No, I hadn't even thought about it. It's a good point.
And-
So
and
we'll
honestly,
add,
a half an hour to 45 minutes for Q&A
I think it's
is
too much.
adequate. Half an hour would be
Yeah, I think
adequate
half an hour
because,
is fine for Q&A.
which gives you a little more time for some of the other topics, because
There may be
we can
Q&A.
play with what we have here
We'll
and
play
put
with it.
together an agenda.
Within each of the
We'll get it
topics, there may
to
be a brief Q&A before you move on.
oh, no, don't do that.
no.
Don't do it, don't do it, David. Well, yeah, because that, it tends to bleed then to other questions that
You
are
know what?
off topic when you.
Okay.
Let's see the parks and facility plan slides. Let's do 6 slides, because then we can get that to a half hour, hoping, which will spill over to 35 minutes, and then we'll do something on the budget high level, we'll do something on the charter high level, and then we go to Q&A, and we'll have ended up killing an entire evening, and it'll be okay.
Are the Q&A, are you going to limit the questions on Q&A?
We have not in the past, I don't think we
Okay,
should.
that's what I was asking.
No.
That's-
No,
okay.
we'll take anything.
Okay.
Also, you don't limit them to be topic that was
No.
covered specific.
No,
Interesting.
No, it can be anything. We've never had people go rogue, other than the county. So it hasn't been a problem.
Well, there was that time Jerry did.
General Barr, 1138 Mosaic Drive. I believe you've answered my question, but what I was going to say is, having organized and given many presentations over my career, I thought initially, when you were talking about 40 or 45 minutes, to give this presentation regarding the facilities plan was just too much time.
Probably
The
right.
more focused you are, the better it is for the community, or for anyone in the audience.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think you're right. Okay, so,
On this, when I think of the Parks and Facilities Master Plan, I think of 3 elements of that. One is, what was the process? Second, what were the results? And third, what are our next steps? In other words, we have the plan. The finalized plan is not the plan, the report is in the board's possession and not the community's, correct?
Correct.
At this point. So we want to highlight the results, we want to highlight the process. And then we need to talk about what the next steps are, because the logical conclusion from the community, I mean, you've already shared, and I think we shared before, that, that one of the top 5 priorities, or the top one, was community center. So what are we going to do about that? I think we need to talk about how are we going to digest this report? How are we going to take these findings and do something with it? And
I think,
what's that process?
so I think it's fair. So I think the process probably is 1 slide.
Yeah, I think it's one slide.
And you and Steve, and I see you and Steve leading this conversation. So if we said process, and I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's one slide.
That's 1 slide. The result, I think people are really gonna wanna know is, okay, what was number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Right.
2 slides, you think?
I don't know, but it's limited.
So it's either 1 or 2 slides, and then I think next steps.
But there's some other slides in there, like the balance between short-term and long-term, enhance the current facility,
easy
and build
wins.
something new.
Some
I mean, we
easy
had those-
wins.
those are two different-
So maybe 3, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, there's a
Because
few-
next steps could be, we'll make the report available online.
Yeah.
And then, I guess, maybe we should talk about, maybe I do this, is we simplify what we just went through in the last hour and say, here's how we think about the buildup of the here's how we think about Island Village and the buildup of the working capital fund, and how we think about the accumulation of assets and how it affects us as we think about timing. Because then, to Mary Ann's point, I fully expect somebody to set up, that's nice, now when do I get my croquet courts, when do I get
Exactly.
pickleball, when do I get
Exactly.
this, when do I get that? And
I'm number 7 on the list, what are you gonna do with it?
Yeah.
Because it's cheaper
And
than number
Number
1.
1.
Ding, 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 ding.
that is a harder answer.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that you're not going to have those answers on
No.
October 23rd.
No, no, that's
You're going to
the
need
goal.
multiple workshops.
We haven't talked about it.
Yeah.
So what is the process? I mean, do we have an initial workshop to start to dive into that? Do that in November, do that in December? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the next steps, is
I agree.
workshops to start working through those.
That
prioritizations.
prioritization, that's going to be a complex effort.
it is. And how much do we set aside, I mean, for immediate needs? I mean, that's part of what the community said.
Yeah.
And the community split on that.
Yeah.
That's short version of the results, which is fine, We just start working that through.
Yeah.
So we workshop.
It is a very complicated conversation.
So basically, item number 2 is going to be communication via email. With the final agenda regarding what's going to happen on the timeline coming out on our agenda, on our, yeah. on
We
our
regret to
agenda.
inform you that the meeting has been
Well,
canceled.
our next workshop,
Mary Ann's not here.
we have a workshop in 2 weeks where we can sort
No,
of,
we got,
Right.
yeah. we need to-
Finalize that
We need to get there.
Yeah.
We have a workshop on what day?
21st, I believe it is, the Monday before the
Yeah,
board
it's
meeting.
Before the
yeah, it's
21st,
before
we
the-
need to get it
Yeah, that's-
done.
Yeah.
Okay.
fine tune it.
Okay, so let's talk about a timeline on development of the slides. How soon, I know you gotta get the budget done. How soon do we get some drafts on slides?
I can get them done over the next couple of days.
Along with the budget stuff?
Sure, I'll be focusing all my attention on those two items.
Susan's like, no.
Steve will be focusing all of his attention on those items.
Okay, so the budget, just so everybody's clear, budget and slides are, and the slides meaning the parks and facilities plan are Steve's focus item. If we get it out this week, it means the board needs to be prepared next week to really start being prepared to respond. I mean, the budget we've got to get out.
Budget's top priority.
And the other thing we need to get prepared for.
Well, and the residents are now used to seeing the budget format that you put it in, so I fully expect that that's gonna be what we'll be putting out to the community.
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
much
get it down to
easier.
2 or 3 pages. Anything else on parks and facilities plan or the 23rd? We agree we got a game plan then.
Sounds like a good plan.
When do we start announcing the 23rd to people so that they can actually get it on their calendar? Maybe with this Friday flash, JR, we should be. For the 20. Okay, good. Anything else?
That should just be highlighted that we're changing the board meeting. It's not at 6 o'clock on the 4th Wednesday. It's at 4 o'clock.
And that agenda at 4 o'clock on that day is going to be, here are the critical business issues that need to be dealt with.
Right. And as much as you can consent would be great.
Jackson's good consents. Okay.
Good.
Item number 3, 851 building. Take it away.
Good morning. So let me preempt a little bit on this. This design, which we'll all go over on the board there, was about 1.5 years of working with concepts, landscape architect, the ARC, TCC. We brought it before the board 8 months ago probably, and when we were talking about adding on to the building, the question was asked, could this work take place and not be affected by any construction? So the answer was yes, it could. I take Eileen's comments to heart because I completely agree that the back area, let's go over that here. This back porch area is quite large. It was expanded to make it more of an event, outdoor event area for like when Food Truck Friday, you have tents and all kinds of stuff. So right about here is where the original concrete is right now. And it was expanded with a sitting wall, a little rotunda area, some more seating here, pavers. So the concept is there, it was all approved after several drafts. But if you look at this, Steve's gonna kill me for saying this whole area here, you could put a building there. Just saying. So I would say don't do anything with that yet until you guys decide what you really wanna do with the building. But keep that in mind, you could put a 2-story structure there. It's bigger than the activity room.
How many square feet is that?
I think it's on there as pavers, it's probably about 4,000 square feet.
Wow.
So you could get
Wow.
8,000 and then above the activity room with the second story.
If it's 2 stories, it would be.
Two stories.
2 stories,
As a
4,000.
building
I'm
would
pretty
be.
sure it would be, let's see, we can measure out here. What's 53
See, here's
times?
You're showing 1,015 square feet with 4x8 pavers.
And there's some other pavers on there as well, so you could get several thousand square feet.
that
I'll
little
get the
block,
measurements
680
out.
square feet right there?
That's just that little area.
Right.
As a
That's
two-story
680
building, that
square
would be
feet,
entirely
double area.
possible to be
Yes.
2,000 square feet.
If we do
Anyway.
53.
So that's something to think about.
So just for clarity, that is the side entrance to get into, or the back entrance to get into the 851 building from the
Yep.
parking, correct?
Yes,
That's that one, that's right off, that's off the
Double doors.
current.
Yeah, okay,
little-
And this
little
is the
patio.
sidewalk off the side.
got it.
Okay, can you zoom out and back into the front steps? So that's just one thought. However, we do have the issue with front steps, and that's been there for quite a while. Can you zoom right in here?
I'm working on it.
So what we have here is an expansion of the front steps. So currently,
Hey, those weathermen have hard work.
I'm used to, everything's touchscreen now, just move it.
right now, the front steps come out to about this point right in here. So the architect came up with more of a step, and then a landing. So it's a lot easier for people to go down the steps. There's railings off to the side, which aren't shown on here, but they're on the other page. So it would expand the whole front area, get some seating out there, and make it more of a town hall entrance to it. I think this is important, even at, at this scale right here. You'd still want to, expand out the pavers in the front. So this is the existing sidewalk. It would just probably double the front stoop of area there.
Apologize.
Just for dimension purposes, the sign that is in the front over here right now,
Yeah.
where would that, the marquee, where, can you see, there it is,
Right
okay.
there.
So there's still space between the sign and the.
There is, yeah, and this would be, you'd have, because there's some slope there, this would have some sloping with the new landscaping around it. It would get rid of some of the grass that's out there now. It would just be landscape material.
I was
So
just
the-
trying to
It
envision
incorporates
how
that.
wide, so distance-wise, how much more are you adding
To the steps?
to the steps?
Probably doubling the
Okay.
length
The
of the
front entrance,
steps.
okay.
And then the width would be, basically, this is where the bump out area is, the front of the building, you got the front that slopes like this.
Uh-huh.
It brings it out to that point, so you got step
Okay.
1, and step 2, and then the third landing.
It's opening up, from an optic standpoint, that you're
Yes.
opening up the entrance and making it more welcoming.
Correct. 'Cause a lot of people during, before, after meetings congregate out here. That would make, Brian wants to get out there and give his speeches, he can do that, address the community. Basically, the
Get him his
employees wanna
top
run out the front door. Right.
Little kids waiting for parents to come up from school.
We can set them out there instead of in here.
Yes, they do.
Even more. Okay, this actually, because we had talked about before when we were talking about the town hall, present something interesting. Because if people say they want a community center, we haven't yet defined what a community center is, which I think is almost part of our answer, because it's fascinating. How many square feet is this all told on the first floor here?
15 and change.
That's what I was thinking,
15.2
15,000.
and 15.3.
That's what I was thinking. So if this is 15, this may be close to 4. If you look at, I'm just looking at component versus component. And the reason I'm saying our answer on 23rd should be what is a community center, because if people say a community center is racquetball courts, that's one thing. That, to me, that's a sports complex.
Yes.
If a community center is better meeting rooms, the ability to have dance-a-size and jazz-a-size, and a lot of other stuff like that, you might be able to do 2 floors here, still have town hall here. If Stetson didn't happen, or if Stetson happens, you have more flexibility. It actually, this could even be an interesting thing on the 23rd, just to help give people perspective that, when we talk about a community center, what is a community center? Because actually found this very fascinating. I didn't understand it at all.
And much more economically
Seeing this, it
efficient.
actually puts things in perspective. I mean, I like this, which is what I think what probably you're talking about.
Yeah.
But this
Right.
presents a ton
Yes.
of flexibility that I have not thought about.
Brian,
It's
can I-
flexibility, and it's going to be much more economically efficient than some of the other alternatives that have been bandied about.
I'd just like to
Just a
also,
thought.
yeah, I'd just like to also add that this is phase 2 of a 2-phase conversation. The first phase was the renovation of the inside of the building, which was new carpeting and the bathrooms, and that all took place at the end of 2017, right? So this was to complete that. So as you can see, we've progressed through the facilities master plan, and so the original direction was to try and renovate that courtyard area, but now that there's other options available, we can certainly rethink that and take a look at that.
Right.
But we do know that there's some necessity at the front with the lack of railing for some of the folks trying to get in the building for the programming, that it's just a difficult access there.
I would hate to postpone anything for the front of the building because we don't know what we want to do at the back of the building. So if you are needing something from the board in order to continue with your efforts there, what do you need from us, I guess is a better question.
I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page before
Sure,
I
make it a difference.
do construction documents and send it out for bids. So it would be very easy to just take the front, get bids for that. I would come back to you, give you more details on what each component, landscaping, hardscape, would cost, and we can move on from there.
I think what we really want is how much detail and conversation do you want to have about what we're doing in the front? Do we want to put it on as another workshop item and just bring you back the front and workshop that separately, or do you want it to come back as a board item, an agenda item to approve and move forward with?
We don't need to micromanage it.
I don't think we need
I don't
to
think we
workshop
do.
on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think two questions for me. One is the general approximate cost of just doing the front, and the second is, from a budget standpoint, what account is that paid from?
Working capital.
Right,
Yeah.
well, no, this is a reserve,
Reserve.
item. This is renovation of existing.
Yes.
And-
Now, if you were to build a building on the back, that would be a working
That would be a-
But this is a reserve item,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Keep in mind
I
that-
don't think, from my standpoint, I don't think we need to micromanage it, but I do want to separate out the front from the back.
Right.
Absolutely.
Two things. One is, as you talk about the front, in earlier conversations, did we talk about having a ramp or ADA access?
We had that, I think we got kind of side railed in ARC because of the approvals that originally took place when we took over Town Hall. And because of the escape routes for fire, it was all suggested that we don't do that. We stick to what we have now with the back and the side exits.
All your handicap parking and everything, or disabled parking's all in the back.
It's in the back, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
The other question is with the sign, there's this sign out here, there's no, out there, whatever.
Wherever.
There's no change on that?
No, just some updated landscaping around it.
So is that an opportunity to look at electronically?
That's TCC approval, and they just are not approving digital signs in town. I think the closest we
When was
have are
the
the
last
ones
time we
along
asked?
192.
When was the last time we asked?
Down.
It's certainly something we can take back to them, but they're still working off the same design guidelines for,
So when was the last time that was broached with them?
It was with
well,
Probably
the,
2014 when the sign.
right, when we built the monument signs,
It's 5 years later.
it never hurts to ask.
And that may be good thing to tie into our technology committee? I mean, just, if that's a look we want
I can
rather
certainly
than.
look at, yeah, I mean, the structure's there already, which is.
Right.
so
Well, and,
Looking at
and
that.
Disney has gone more digital signs.
They have.
Yeah, yeah.
Lots changed since 2014.
It's worth having a conversation.
I agree.
Okay.
Doesn't mean we want to go that way, it's worth having a conversation.
And these plans at this point have been approved by ARC?
Yes.
And the architect, I assume, did we have a hardscape or a landscape architect, and was that Albert Riddle?
It was, yes.
And was the architectural work done by Jeffrey Mallon?
Yes, both.
And did we pay both of those architects as town representatives, or, in other words, we have our contracts with them, or were they paid separately for this work?
Albert Riddle was paid separately, and that's when he worked for Canaan and Associates.
Okay, which you
So
know
it
of.
wasn't directly to Albert. So
Okay.
yes.
And what about Jeffrey's work?
No, that was just through his ARC reviews for his input.
So review, not.
Correct,
Not the
correct.
actual drawings.
He made his suggestions when we did the conceptuals. Then we went back and revised the plans, took it back. I think it went through 3 times through ARC.
So basically, you did the drawings, right? I mean, you're being
I had a lot of input.
You're being modest, but you did the drawings, right?
I had a lot of input.
Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
As we get into the detail, I would like to just make sure that we're not crossing lines with these consultants. The appearance of conflicts of interest continue to be problematic here.
Yeah, that's been noted since we did this, and that was about, 8-9 months ago.
Okay.
Duly noted.
My turn. Your turn.
Got the hot seat.
I would take a position, my opinion would be that I wouldn't spend any capital dollars on any buildings until we determine what we have going on over the next couple of months. Because I think one option that's in play right now is going to clear itself up probably in the next 60, 90 days, 120 days maximum, end of the year, call it. So I would suggest strongly that you don't put dollars of capital in any building until we see how that plays out and know where the best use and expenditure of our capital is. So I think we've waited this long on the front porch. If it's lasted this long, I think we can last another 60, 90 days and see what happens.
But it does come from reserve, it doesn't come from capital.
Right, that would be the only
It's still money, it's still dollars.
It's definitely still dollars, and the point makes sense, but you cannot use your reserve dollars towards capital projects, though. So if you wanted to build a new building, you couldn't pull from that fund.
No, I didn't say that.
No, I know, I just wanted to make that
Yeah,
clarification.
but I think, you could have a little more information probably in the next 60, 90 days, if not sooner. And why not wait until then? This project's been going on for a long time. Just wait a little bit longer and make a fully informed decision. And once that rules out, then you can decide.
Thank you, Mike. I guess I just have a question. Regardless of the direction we go with Stetson or anything like that, I personally would not be in support of selling or doing anything else with this property. I think this is an asset that belongs to CROA. I don't know that even what we did with our property, like I said, with any other decisions, I don't think I would change the front facade. And as far as what we did there wouldn't impact whether or not we redid the front steps. I think, at least in my view. I don't know, unless there was an implication to waiting, I don't mind waiting. But if there's a reason, if you feel that you need to just get it done because we've been waiting for a while for this, I guess I'm just open for that conversation. It doesn't have to happen now. I guess I just don't want to. I don't want to wait even 60, 90, 120 days when I don't think that our purpose, I would not be in favor of selling this building, period. So, and repurposing it, I don't think would change whether we did or didn't do anything to the front of the building. That's just my.
Your biggest advocates for the work that needs to be done in the front of the building are folks that are having trouble getting into the building. They need some handrails there. It's very difficult.
They do.
So timeline-wise, given our board date deadlines and the earlier board meetings that we're going to have in November and December, if you give your approval to get pricing for the front renovations, it would probably be December board meeting when I would have those proposals to you. So you're looking, even if you pull the trigger or say delay it, whatever, you at least have those numbers in December for work to start possibly January, February is about the timeline we're looking at, if you say yes today.
Getting pricing is not a commitment.
It is
to the
not.
project, so it would be a productive use of the time while we wait. So I would be an advocate for getting the pricing at this juncture, because we're not going to make a decision until we have pricing, so it seems to align.
So once you have a pricing, how long is that good for? Typically, 30 days?
30, 90, it depends on how
The
you're
ones I
looking
receive
at.
are usually 90 days.
Okay, so that gives you that window.
We can put that as a stipulation.
As a little history, the reason we ended up where we ended up today is originally had been questioned by Vaughn and me, that we wanted to make sure we didn't make changes that would be a waste of money if we decided to put a second floor on here. So what was done with the front here, the way it was done, was so that it would be money spent once that wouldn't be damaged by putting on a second floor.
Right.
If it takes 60 to 90 days, if we could sit around talking about estimates around the end of December or early January, I think that's perfectly fine, and then we can have a more intelligent conversation, as Mike said. So, you know, don't tell somebody it's a fire, tell them to study it, think about it, and we have something to talk about in December, January.
The other thing, and I certainly don't want to speak for other board members, but I recall in previous conversations, Kevin in particular had talked about our landscaping not being of a quality here that we would expect homeowners to meet.
Right.
And I think he's right about that. I think that, you know, this plan brings our appearance in the front to a standard that we think would be appropriate for a town hall facility, regardless of what else we did. So I think there's some reason, as Vanessa says, to move forward, get the pricing. There's no reason for us to delay doing that part.
Right, agreed.
And we're all in agreement the back is just on hold for now.
Yeah, I would
hold
I
back.
actually think we have a fascinating back conversation that we could have,
Yeah.
depending on how other events may unfurl.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Very good.
Fair enough?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay, it is 25 under. Does anybody have a hard stop at 11:30, or do we have a little?
I do, we have one, actually, I think she had a hard stop.
I had a hard stop at 11:15.
I think the next item forward
Come on
can
up,
move through
Patrick.
rather quickly.
Let's do it quickly.
And I'll just prep it while Patrick's walking up. We have had some issues with bandwidth and with meetings pausing and things like that. So Smart City has agreed to a certain amount of bandwidth, and Patrick's here, so go ahead and take over from there.
Right, simply the 851 building, this building here, we were operating with a 50 megabit up and down internet connection. And, you know, as, right.
And now you know why our internet's down.
This is an agreement that was once in place back in, 2014. So we didn't have the live streaming and the voice over IP at that point, so it held up pretty well. But as we began getting more and more into technology and some of the things that require internet, to take a step further, the laptops and the cell phones, and they all eat up bandwidth. So went back to Smart City, and they basically came back and said, we'll renew the contract, and we'll just double your speed. And so that brings us up to 100 megabits, up and down. And they said they'll honor that at the same pricing.
With the renewal.
With the renewal.
Does fiber come into this building?
Yes.
And is 100 megabits good?
Yes.
Better than 50.
Yes.
Well, my question,
Is it good enough?
My question very simply is, and I know nothing technology-wise, is that, are we putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound, or is the right answer we should have 250? I'm just trying to ask an innocent question.
How far does it go?
1,000.
Yeah, they can go up to 1,000.
And the right answer is we need what? I mean, just to educate people, video streaming is not working, recording is not working, we're having all kinds of problems, and we're trying to be transparent while we're not letting people see anything. So what is your recommendation as to what we honestly need?
Truthfully, 100 should cut it. But we don't know what's going to happen for the future.
Right.
Meaning, you know, we can always upgrade cameras to be 4K if we wanted that, just no different than a TV. You have the necessity, what you have right now, and then you can always upgrade cameras. That's a later on decision.
You're perfectly happy going to 100 and seeing what happens.
Correct.
we
We can always go back to Smart City and say we need more.
So in my assessment, because we went through something similar not terribly long ago at our headquarters building, what Smart City has done by doubling it without charging more is giving us a gift to be able to do better than what we're doing right now while we do think about the future and analyze what we're going to need, because we will incur additional expense for this eventually. But the expense to go to 1,000 with fiber now is actually not that, it's not that dramatic like it used to be when you raised up that, because the fiber's the fiber. But I think that this is a great way to give us the flexibility to see how does the 100 work and to start thinking about what are our needs going to be in the future, because our needs will expand. And we did something similar. We went up a little bit, you know, and we doubled similar to really see how did that work, what was this going to, and what were we planning to put in place in the future that was going to have, you know, a higher demand. And look, we're growing, so there's always going to be a higher demand, and technology is growing. So I think this is a great, not Band-Aid solution, but evolution. I would think this is it.
So over time, what he's basically, our account representative, Smart City, what they've basically done was taken a look at our usage history over time, and it's been somewhere around the 35 to 40.
Don't sell, you're already sold. Everybody agree, proceed?
Yep.
You're done.
Can we get a motion in a second to approve this?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Done.
Okay, and then last, I'd like to move 5 to the next meeting if we can, and talk about 6 quickly.
Yep.
Is that acceptable?
Yep. I love you all, I have to go.
That actually came from the Covenants Committee.
Yes.
And it was about, I think they historically had.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to frame it up.
Go ahead.
So typically, since I've started here in 2014, there have been no covenant letters sent out over the holidays for Thanksgiving in December. So it really is an expectation within the community. So I think the question that's presented to you today, and the Covenants Committee has made a suggestion to keep pushing forward with them, is the level of service in the community looking at a point now where we think it's important that we continue to send violation letters through November and December. That time does free us up to, and historically we've used November and December in that department to catch up on some work that we've fallen behind in throughout the year. So that will affect us slightly. So I think that's the question that's being presented to you today. Are we in that bad of shape to where we need to change what we've historically done with sending letters during the holidays?
And I think the committee said, Gary can voice on that, the committee was saying, if you delay, then come January, then in February, you have big backlogs, so someone may be 3 months before they get hurt. So just keep on rolling. Is the committee's unanimous recommendation to keep on rolling and change things from what was done in the past.
Can I just, I've got a couple things. I think it's important that it goes beyond our Covenants Committee, and because it actually will directly impact every resident at some level. So I think that it needs to be the board that makes this decision rather than the Covenants Committee, which I'm assuming is why they pushed it back to us. I do think it warrants a conversation because it is a difference in philosophy. In the past, we've had, I'll share with you just some experience from being on the past board, where it was a huge issue when, something was sent out. The reason why we instituted this is because we got pushback from the community. Wait a minute, it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, I'm gone, I'm out of here, and now you're sending me a letter, and then you're fining me because I haven't responded in time. So the reason why we instituted this policy 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was because the community reached back and said, wait a minute, I'm not even home. Please, or I just spent all this money on my holidays, I'm on a budget, now you're telling me I've got to do something else. So it really is something that I think the board needs to make a thorough evaluation as to whether or not we want to go through, because it is not just a simple letter we're sending out. It is actually impacting people's lives.
Yeah, I appreciate all that, but as someone who does live here, if someone else isn't here for November and December, God love them, but I get to see their, unattractive home or things that they're not keeping up with, and I don't think that's fair either. I also think that we're getting pushed further and further. We have, the members of this board know, we are dealing with whack-a-mole on stuff right now. It is not going away. It's becoming more aggressive, and it's becoming more pervasive. And I'm not sure that a 2-month hiatus or amnesty period does anybody any favors. So I'm inclined to say, okay, among the many things that people will be unhappy about, I guess they might be unhappy that we would choose to send letters in November and December, but that's the obligation that all of us make in this community. We recognize that there are covenants, and we recognize that you're supposed to live up to those. And I'm very reluctant to say for 60 days, we just don't act on them.
This weekend, I received 3 texts telling me of homes that were not up to standards, and I had 3 people stop me to tell me homes were not up to standards.
Yeah, I get that.
And wanting to know when in the hell CROA is gonna get on the ball and make people fix up their properties. I would be, I don't mind having a conversation at the next workshop, but I would personally be a fan.
I don't think we need to have a conversation at the next board workshop. I just think we need to have an open conversation here now because it's on our agenda to discuss it.
Okay.
So.
And I personally would be a fan of, if the committee is willing to work, we keep going.
I think if we're going to change what historically has been done, recent history at least, that we put some sort of communication piece out to let residents know that inspections and letters will still be sent out during the months of November and December.
It's all about education. It's a changing process.
And I would agree with what you have said. We're definitely going to get the backlash. We're going to hear about it for November, December, but I can completely understand the board's stance of there's no time for us to stop them.
We just need to make sure that it's the board that's taking the grief, not the covenants committee, because that's what's gonna happen. I'm just letting you know. So we just need to be able to take the heat, which is fine. I just wanted to make sure that we all go in with this with both eyes wide open.
Well, that's a pretty consistent message that I put back out and I talked to staff about, is that don't shoot the messenger here. I mean, if there's one thing that you're required to do with your governing documents, that's to make sure that houses are maintained and covenants. So that is absolutely, and then maintaining your amenities is the other side that you have to do. So inspectors are out there doing their jobs.
Okay, very simple.
So do we-
On October 23rd at the town hall, Mr. Kinsel can say, just so you're all aware, we're keeping this rolling.
Do we need to have a motion in a second since it's changed in policy?
Is it actually a policy?
That's not a written policy. I think it was just something that has been asked of us to hold off in November and December. But I think that if we're getting the consent to move forward, and that's the board giving me one voice direction at that
Okay,
point.
I'm good with that.
Gary, were you going to say something, or you're, okay, thank you.
You're good? Okay.
Can I raise one other issue on it? It's an item that's on the agenda very quickly.
I just want to make sure that is a
That
yes,
is your,
one voice
that is your
direction.
one voice
Okay.
direction. You have 4 of us here that are giving you one voice to
We'll
continue
proceed.
And
forward.
Vaughn is yelling from Phoenix, hey kid, get off my lawn. Can I talk about Blue Sage for one moment?
Sure.
We had service area meetings there, and in many of the service area meetings, not just Blue Sage, owners are talking about roof replacement and being unhappy either with the vendor or the cost of the roof replacement or an engineer's study. And one of the questions that came up was, what if the homeowners in a service area agreed to a hold harmless agreement if something went wrong? We have received a legal opinion that confirms what I think we all felt, which was that's a really bad idea, and it would not have any real viable impact. Ultimately, the decision about replacing roofs, replacing gutters, doing any kind of maintenance to a service area is the responsibility of this board. Where the service area committee exists, and we only have 2 of those right now in place, other than 2 small service area groups in place, they can advise, but it is still not their choice. And so I would ask the board to continue to move forward in directing management to take the reasonable actions necessary to protect the property values in the service areas. And owners are welcome and invited to comment. We got an email, the board got an email, I think this morning, from an owner in
Oak Pond.
Oak Pond.
I get that Oak Pond could form a service area committee, but they haven't. And at the end of the day, it's up to CROA as a entity and to management under CROA's direction to make decisions about what to do on these things. If you live in a service area, that's part of what you agreed to, is that you don't get unique, unilateral, complete control over your property.
Let's just be perfectly clear here. Roofs cost money. There are many people who would like to have Sam's Roofing Company just come in and do their roof for free and not use an engineer. If something goes wrong, it's CCMC or the CROA board's fault. We have made a decision that we want to use very reputable
Yeah.
companies. We want to have an engineer overseeing the process because it is clearly best practice and it protects all of CROA residents because we have layers of insurance protection and stuff like that if something goes wrong. And if you have 5 or 6 years when there's no hurricanes, roofing prices go down, and if you have 3 or 4 years of storms, guess what, roofing prices go up, and it affects all of us. I mean, we need to use best practice.
Yes.
I agree.
I 100% think we have board support on that.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for pointing that out.
And then the last bullet was UCF sustainability study, and that is a meeting we have with Dr. David Mitchell tomorrow with the department heads, just to go through the final listing of outcomes and determining what those measurements are going to look like, and then how those would be incorporated into board packets. And I believe he's been in contact with you, Jackson, is that correct? And you're comfortable with this route so far? Okay.
Okay, any other board comment? Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
David's the second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, audience, we appreciate it.